to 21. We'll go to the end of the chapter. We're going to start over here with Julia and just go down the row and read one verse at a time, nice and loud.
Why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of young age? So you would endanger my head with thinking.
Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink.
Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see.
So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days.
Where are we? At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food.
So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams.
At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the king of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar.
And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king.
And in every matter of wisdom and understanding, about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom.
And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus.
Great. Good job. Okay, here's our question again. How should Christians react in an environment that is strongly secular? Why is this a good question? Okay. 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 Any other ideas of why this is a good question?
Our society is only getting more secular.
Okay. Prove it. I don't have to stare at you. It's not just you. Is it a good question because it's accurate? Like, is it as relevant as we we think is? Do we live in a secular society? So, okay, so we're going to get back to discussing terms in just a minute. I think that's true. I think it's not. Sometimes it's more or less true, right? So we don't want to pretend that America is as bad as it could be, or that we're living in the worst society that's ever been. We just want to try to begin to understand the place we live. Now, why is this a bad question? Not to make whoever wrote it feel bad, but let me read it again and see if you can guess which word I don't really like in the question. Okay? How should Christians react in an environment that is strongly secular? That's the word I don't like. I don't like the word react. I want to move towards something different by the end of our discussion, right? Because reacting is not nearly as good a thing as moving forward and being purposeful and loving. What were you going to say? Yeah, great. Okay, so we're on the same page. Okay, so it is a good question. Let's talk about our terms. What does the term secular mean? Worldly, okay. I dig it. What else?
Atheistic.
Atheistic. All religious, okay.
I was going to say, actually I forgot what I was going to say. She said.
That's okay. Okay. What is the opposite or the antonym of the word secular? I used that word right, didn't I? Antonym? Good, okay. Charlie? Okay. That's not what I had, but I won't disagree. Yeah, righteous. What are some other opposites of the word secular? Okay. Holy. Religious. Both those are getting closer to what I'm thinking about. Holy is especially pretty good.
I was going to say non-secular. I'm sorry.
So glad you're here. The word I had in mind was the word sacred, which is really related to the word holy, right? So sacred and secular are sometimes contrasted. Would somebody read for us Ecclesiastes? Let's do a sword drill. Hold up your Bible. Yes.
Wait, what? What's a sword drill? I don't know what a sword drill is.
Should have a Bible. Okay, well, those of you who have Bibles, don't go till I say go. But you're gonna. What's that? Thank you. Well, I'm not looking up. Yeah, don't get your finger in there. Okay. Charlie has lots of memories to lose to Lily over the years. Okay. The first one to get to Ecclesiastes 1:14, stand up and read it. Okay, without a phone. Go. $1.14.
Behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind.
Oh, he didn't stand. Maya's got it. Go for it, Maya. Okay, let's wait. Everybody turn there if you're not there yet. Ecclesiastes 1:14, and Maya's gonna get the microphone if you would, and she's gonna read it one more time for us. Ecclesiastes is right after the book of. No. Proverbs.
I don't look though. I don't look.
Good thing he's not a pastor's kid.
I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind.
Okay, so our Bible study is studying the book of Ecclesiastes. It is depressing. It is not a book to make you happy. And a lot of times he says something like this. I look out, I see people working, I see people having fun, I see people, whatever it is, it doesn't mean anything. And so he uses the phrase there in Ecclesiastes 1:14, I have seen everything that is done. What are the next three words? Under the sun. What do you think that means? I heard people mumbling. I just didn't hear a clear answer.
It's done on earth.
On earth. So under the sun is on earth.
Does that also mean everything that's done in the light, not in the darkness?
Oh, that's interesting. No, but that would be that's a good guess. But we're going to move in the other direction, actually. Yeah. So under the sun is contrasted with over the sun. And in the old Hebrew mindset, what's over the sun? God and heaven. Under the sun means life apart from heaven. So that's what Ecclesiastes is really talking about. If you take God out of the equation, what's the point of going to work? It's meaningless. It's a vanity. It's a striving after the wind. If you take God out of the equation, what's the point of gaining wisdom? Or having fun? Or eating good food? It doesn't matter. And I think Ecclesiastes really speaks to what we're trying to explain here in terms of what do we mean by secular versus sacred. Under the sun, over the sun. Right? So what do you see in the world you live in that makes you think, we're either a secular society or we're headed in that direction? Just what's your own evidence toward that? Yeah, so if the idea is, we said a few minutes ago that we are talking about this because we live in a secular society. I mean, why do you think that you live in a secular society?
Because of how self-centered people are and how much they think that their opinion or belief is the only thing that matters.
Okay. That might not be, that's interesting. I'll stick with it. Okay, great. Atheism is considered default. Is that true from coast to coast in America? No. So it's interesting because when we talk about a secular society, are we really able to talk about all of America as one thing? I don't think we are. How many of you have lived in a different state at some point? Or a different country, right? So if you've been in other places, you've seen that not every place is the same. So let's talk a little bit more about Tippecanoe County in Indiana. Are we a secular society? Oh, I've got youth group leaders that are about to fight. This is good. One's nodding and one's shaking her head. Charlie?
I say yes, but it definitely depends on your definition of secular. Like I feel like at least for Tippecanoe County, you'd have to have a pretty detailed definition of secular before you called this area secular. But I think you could.
Right. Okay, so I think that's a good nuance and maybe helps our youth group leaders get along. You were shaking your head. No? Yes, it is. It's a secular society. What were you shaking your head, Josh? Okay, so Josh is going to tell us why he doesn't think.
Because I'm comparing it to other places.
Okay.
And all things considering, we have it pretty easy.
Okay. Maybe secularization is not as bad as we think it is. Maybe Indiana has its own challenges for young Christians that Seattle doesn't, right? So you go to a coast, you'll find a city. You live there, far fewer people attend church. So we could call those cities, those places, more secular, less sacred. But as everything kind of does in the history of America, it's creeping in, right? It's creeping in from the coasts. We see it. It's happening. So here's a quote and a question for you to discuss, to think about. So this is by a philosopher named Charles Taylor. Why was it virtually impossible not to believe in God in, say, 1,500 years in our Western society, while in 2000, right now, many of us find this not only easy, but even inescapable? So let me say the question again. So for 1,500 years of Western society, it was almost impossible to not believe in God. That doesn't make everybody a Christian, but it made everybody clearly religious, and that everybody understood for 1,500 years there's another world, there's another spiritual reality. Now it's easy. Why?
I'd say it was part of
Culture, right? So, yes. Can you give me any more? Like, what do you mean? What are some of the things you're thinking about when you say that?
It was kind of not acceptable to not go to church or not be a Christian. So
Okay.
there could have been a lot more nominal Christianity, but
Right. So there was a cultural pressure holding everything together, keeping people in church, keeping people spiritual to some degree. And you're saying that cultural pressure is gone or is leaving. Why? Why is that cultural? I agree with you. Why is that cultural pressure? Or you don't have to have the answer. This guy Charles Taylor wrote like a 2,000-page book about this question. So don't feel like you gotta. But why do you think that change has happened or is happening, Charlie?
The rise of new idols in American culture.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. David.
I think I like that. I think I would one up that. I think it's the rise of new gods. They're able to replace God with something, or try to.
So you might argue that people who are secular aren't really secular.
Well, with our definition, we're defining secular as an opposition to righteousness. Right? Isn't that what we started with?
To sacred. That there's nothing sacred. There's nothing. There's not another world. There's not a spiritual reality.
Yeah. So I think they're able to find a worldly God to serve.
Okay.
Which I would say is self.
Okay. Lily.
So I think we don't like submitting to an authority, and like in the 1700s, somewhere in there, like with Enlightenment thinking and people starting to like reach out from under the idea of a God and be able to at least attempt to explain themselves, their existence, the existence of the world through science and reason and like man-centered things became really appealing because I think it appeals to our own pride, and it gave people an escape from having a higher authority that they had to submit to when they could see man as the highest authority. And then, of course, evolution with Darwin was like a huge breakthrough in that kind of area of thinking, and people have just like jumped more and more on that bandwagon, and the whole idea of thought has grown since then.
And we weren't there to like see that period in time, but it just feels like there's an increasing, like massive just sense of self-sufficiency.
Okay. We'll go back and then we'll go to Anna after that. Go ahead, Grant.
So now there are a lot more religions and or denominations of even Christianity.
Okay.
There are a lot of denominations that would say they are Christian that are likely not preaching the gospel or are preaching it in a way where it makes people feel good,
right,
and maybe isn't actually the gospel.
You're onto something. Could it be that the church is at fault for the secularization of Western society?
Partially, yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to Anna.
That wasn't my answer. It seems like maybe that was.
Nice.
But I agree with that. But I think this is more recent than the 1500s, but I feel like it has been greatly accelerated by the expansion of technology, and people just have access to more information. They have access to more people. You know, before the 1500s, who you grew up around, you married the guy in your village and you learned from the books in your parents' cabinet. Now, it just gets muddy. I mean, you start looking online and there's belief in everything. Right. And so people have access to more information, good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Charlie.
I was just going to say, like, Lily really hit something pretty good with the Enlightenment period. You know, there was especially in the early church history, there was a period where people, their opinions were very much what they were told. And then things like the Gutenberg press came, and then you can see in literature that especially, I think it was a large part in the church, especially during that time period, and it's really grown since then, that faulty leadership in the church was seen by people and was start to being expressed in different ways, and that, I think, has, you know, grown into modern secular things.
Okay. Thanks, Julia.
To view the church as, well, the church kind of became somewhere you went if you were like a Christian, and if you were like a Christian, it meant you were a good person. But now, like, it's not desirable to everybody to be a good person. Like, people don't necessarily care what they say or care how they act. So like that means that not everyone like feels a pressure to call themselves a Christian.
Yep. So let me give you a couple of things to think about while we're chewing this over. What institution did God put in the world to maintain the truth? The church is the pillar and buttress of the truth. If a society has lost its light, the church can't very well point a finger at society and say, you are supposed to do better than this. Right? So keep that in mind. While we talk about secular society, a lot of times we're like, look how bad everybody else is. There's a reason America is where it is right now, and the reason is the church. It's not how people are bad all the time. We're supposed to be the light, and there's lots of, you study church history, there's lots of, I mean, thousands of rabbit trails we could go down right now to talk about how the church has failed and kind of led to where we are right now. We're not going to go down all those rabbit trails. But another interesting thought, Charles Taylor, the guy I quoted a minute ago, is a Roman Catholic, and he says the fault began, or the problem began, with the Reformation. Any thoughts about how he would argue that? Grant.
This actually just came up in my philosophy class.
Okay.
My teacher is Catholic.
Yeah.
So
Here we go.
All my classmates are Protestant.
Right.
So there's a point, the book that we were reading is also Protestant, and it mentioned something about the Reformation because that was the time period we were in. And she mentioned how it was a sad thing because when the church split up, people saw it as no longer a constant. And then with more and more facets or different denominations of the church, people began to rely more on math and science because they saw it as more of a constant.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of things here, but a few things. So we're Reformed Christians, but we still should have the guts to look at history and see not everything that happened after the Reformation was good. Up until the Reformation, how many churches were there in the world? Two, right? There's the Eastern Church and the Western Church. There's the Church of Rome and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Just two. And for better or worse, if there's only one, let's just talk about one church for now. If there's only one church, everybody's a part of it. It is the institution that kept the world going and kept the world together. And here comes the reformers. They wanted to reform the church. They weren't allowed to. They were kicked out. But the institution itself began to suffer. And as soon as they left and started other churches, now there's two churches in a city, and now the church is not the center of a society anymore, as it used to be. Another thing that happened was that the Roman Catholic Church had such a strong focus on the institution that it didn't have much of a focus on the personal and the salvation of individuals. And here come the reformers saying you have to be born again. You have to have faith. It talked a lot about personal faith and personal growth and personal regeneration, which is good. But the downside of that is over the centuries, we became focused on the individual over the church. And the individual now is the thing. And people kind of just hop churches all the time, and it's not the center. It's not the force that it used to be, and part of that is the individualization of Christianity, right? And that does go back in part to the Reformation. So that wasn't like Calvin and Luther weren't hanging out saying, how can we throw this all to heck? It was like this is just one of the fruits of where they had to go. So, okay. One thing to look for in terms, so Charlie mentioned, if we're going to call Tippecanoe County a secular society, we need to kind of know what we're saying and what we're not saying, right? I think we're not saying that Tippecanoe County as a whole is openly hostile to the Christian faith. I don't think it's wise to say that, partly because there are places in the world where there is open hostility to the Christian faith, and it kind of dishonors our brothers and sisters around the world when we're like, woe is us. But so why do we still think, though? Yeah, they're not yelling at us all the time whenever we come to worship. So why do we feel the pressure or the growth of secularization around us? Julia.
Because our friends who aren't Christians don't act like us. They maybe don't necessarily care that we're a Christian. Well, some of them definitely do, but some of them don't. But they still, they act different than us, and people sometimes can tell you're different, or you don't want to act like them because they're ungodly, but then you don't fit in. Okay,
so you guys, some of you feel it on just a personal level. There's more of a divide between you and people who aren't Christians. Maybe in your more of a question. Maybe in your age group. Is there less pressure for people to call themselves a Christian than there would be in when I was growing up, right? And there's less embarrassment for not being a Christian, and maybe there's no embarrassment for not being a Christian. So that's one sign that secularization is growing. Another really key sign that secularization is growing is when your faith is allowed. Nobody's going to tell you can't believe, but they want you to keep it home. Does that make sense? Have you seen or felt any of that? How do you see or feel that, Charlie?
I saw this a lot in the basketball locker room last year. I think we were having because there was a rather inappropriate would you rather question proposed of would you had the outcome of it was there's a debate over whether or not the choice to be gay was biological or not. Yeah. And one of the conclusions some of the people that were arguing they very much wanted the religious part out of it. They're like, you have to read science, you can't a book from that's not an acceptable reference in this situation.
Right. That's a good example. You have other examples, Isabel?
Like a few coworkers in particular last year who just, like, they knew I was Christian and they knew what I believed, but it was very much like, that doesn't have anything to do with me, that doesn't have anything to do with the way that I live, and that's your choice.
Right.
Like, it's each our own choice, and doesn't.
Pass it back to Grant.
Our legal system doesn't accept the Bible as a valid source.
Yeah. Julie.
People, like, especially at, like, school and sports, even if they know you're Christian, they expect you to act like non-believers in non-Christian situations, and they don't expect you to act like a Christian, because a lot of people who are, like, they act completely different at church than at school.
Yeah. Okay. So, we agree this is our situation. How do we fix our society? Nolan, what were you going to say? Is there any hope for America? No. What's that? We would pray. Okay. It's a hard question. Does anybody know who Abraham Kuyper was? Some of you. He was the president, chief something, the leader of the Netherlands at one point, but also as a theologian. And he wrote some stuff about Christianity and culture, and he's the one who came up with this quote where there's nothing at which Jesus can't point and say, that's mine. And so he's calling, it's a good book, he's calling Christians to go and sort of like take the world for Jesus, like go into your fields and do your work for Jesus and become a chemist for Jesus or this for and bring the sacred back. And there's nothing wrong with what he wrote, but right now we might not be there. And right now for me to say, hey, if you guys just tough it out, as soon as, 5, 6, 7 years from now, you graduate from college and you can just go take the world for Jesus and you'll be able to be a Christian scientist or a Christian this, and it'll be great and easy. I don't think it's true. I just think it's going to get worse. And the reality is, when we talk about the culture wars in America, we have lost. That doesn't mean we stop fighting, especially for things that are moral and important, like pro-life causes and things like that. But we need to recognize that, like, the battle over sexuality, things like that, we need to believe what's true, but we're not going to, unless there's a genuine revival, the trajectory of the church right now is not going to overcome what's going on in our world. So where does that leave us? We got to go home. Sorry, that's it. We're out of time. I'm just kidding. I don't leave you there. That to me is where I feel the weight of it. Because I grew up with the other mindset that we can change the world. Because we have the gospel, we have the Bible, we can do it, we can get America back for Jesus. And that was a big part of, like, right-wing politics in the 70s and 80s and 90s, was just getting everything back for Jesus. And it didn't work, and it probably made the church worse along the way. So, we need a different path. And that's kind of what I want to think about. What time do you want me to be done? 7:30, okay. 9:30, she said. Here we go. A few things that I think are really, really important. So, and this isn't like a perfect or a full list. But when I think about what do you need, what's really necessary to live in an environment that is increasingly secular, what do you need? Right? So this is just where we are. I can't change your world. I can't make everybody nice to you or to Jesus when you go to school tomorrow. So you got to live here. What do you need in order to live here in a way that is glorifying to Jesus? I've got my list, but what's your list? Raya. Encouragement, because it gets exhausting. Yes, we'll get there. That's good. That's helpful. The church, and that's going to tie to Mariah's answer too. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Okay, that's good. The word. Jesus. Right. Yeah. And that's going to that's kind of the ground of all of this. Somebody look up for us Ephesians 2:19. Okay. Thank you. You are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. One of the things that you need to live in this world is personal faith. You have to be born again. And if you're not born again, the wheels are going to fall off this bus. If you don't have your own personal, regenerated, converted, living faith, then you can try to live for Jesus in a secular world, but it's going to eat you up. You're going to hate it, and you're going to leave Jesus because of it. That's just how it's going to happen. So before we get to any other answers, if you're not born again, they're not going to work, right? And so your own personal faith is really, really necessary. And more with that, your identity then comes from Ephesians 2:19. Now you are citizens of another kingdom. And that's really important for your mindset and your joy and your encouragement. If I'm born again, where is my identity? Where is my citizenship? It's in heaven. It's in the kingdom of God. And therefore, it's not in America or in Tippecanoe County. Now I'm here, and now I'm an alien here. Now I don't fully belong here. I'm an outsider. And that sounds bad, but it's actually the right mindset. I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm going to go to school or go wherever I go. This isn't my home. This is not my ultimate home. And I'm going somewhere else. I belong somewhere. That identity is the right thing. Everybody look up John chapter 17. Because Jesus talked about this a lot. He even prayed this about you and me. All right, so John 17. To our enemies. The way, that's a good answer. Which is? And love. Right? So when we talk about what's going to overcome the world, that's from 1 John. John writes, he says, here's what overcomes the world. You know what he says? Your faith has overcome the world. It's already won. So there's an already encouragement to victory. And so as we go out, we don't belong. We are set apart. People aren't going to like us. People are going to make fun of us. And we respond with love because that's what Jesus did. And that's what wins. Josh.
Sometimes, I think we've even talked about this. Sometimes we use these big terms like love people, and it sounds great. But I think when push comes to shove, we don't actually know what that means in the heat of the moment. Could you hash that out a little bit of maybe some practical applications of what it means to actually love someone?
Yeah. So maybe a definition I would offer, thanks for the question, is to sacrificially put somebody else's needs ahead of your own. That's not perfect, but just for the example. So you go to school, you're interacting with an unbeliever, there's some conflict, and your faith is part of that conflict. In that moment, are you thinking, how can I bless this person or how can I beat them? How do I win this conversation, or how do I bless this person? What is their spiritual need, and what can I do to help meet that need? Those are two very different ways of thinking. And a lot of times, we have Sunday school classes and apologetics here, and we have lessons like this, and we teach people how to win arguments and quote verses that I'm not sure we teach people how to love the world, or love the people in the world, rather. Julia.
How do we bless people by, like, who we want to share the gospel to, who are, like, fighting back and don't want to hear the gospel?
That's a great question, and we could talk a long time about just what is love. What's a loving type of evangelism for people who don't? But I think even asking the question is the right first step. Right? This person, I want to hear it. I want them to hear the gospel, and I want them to feel loved. What does that look like? What does it look like when you feel loved? You pay attention to somebody, you care for them, you listen to them. You don't do all the talking. You ask them questions about their life and their heart, and then you begin to get a sense of who they are, and then over time, here's how I think you might really enjoy meeting Jesus, right? So that's a great question, Anna.
I just wonder if we could add to your definition. I'm thinking about like a lot of conversations that were very controversial conversations. Anyway, we disagreed,
right.
But they went well. I wonder if you could add to that, like putting someone else's, I forget what you said, blessing,
Yeah.
someone else's needs, sacrifice,
Yeah.
without compromising the truth.
Yeah. Great. I'm with you.
Sometimes I think in an effort to love people, it can be easy to be like, so I'm just going to suppress the truth a little bit because that's going to make you feel loved.
Right.
But there's a way to hold those two things in balance.
That's right. Thank you. Okay, I've got 3 minutes to cover my last 3 ideas. I might take 4 minutes. So the first necessity is personal faith. The second necessity, I don't have a great word for this, so I called it front burner faith. So you have a back burner and you have a front burner in your life. You put things on the back burner on your stove that you can ignore for a little while. You put things on the front burner that you need to pay attention to. If you have a faith, which I hope most of you do, is it front burner in your life or is it back burner? And so here's a quote. This is from a guy named Julian Barnes. He said, "What's the point of faith unless you and it are serious? Seriously serious. Unless your religion fills, directs, stains, and sustains your life." He's an atheist who left God because his religion wasn't that. But it's a good question. What's the point? If it doesn't mean everything to you, then what's the point? So is your faith with you all the time? It's not just are you converted, but is your faith really with you? And I like that phrase, staining and sustaining your life. So we need front burner faith. This is the point of your spiritual disciplines. This is why we teach you to read the Bible every day. It's not to get super nerdy and brainy about the Bible. It's because you need to be close to Jesus every day, or else your faith is going to get on the back burner and not help you and not help anybody else. Thirdly, what is absolutely necessary is the church. So yes, the church is part of the problem, but the reality is it's also the only answer Jesus is going to give to this world. So this is it. So if you want to live faithfully as a Christian in a secular society, it's going to be in the church. You're going to be surrounded by this, right? So you're going to go out, but you're going to come back, right? And you're going to live close, and when you sometimes geographically close, and we are together so that we can support each other, because without the support of the church, this isn't going to happen. You're not going to live faithfully by yourself. You won't. You can have all the best intentions and all the good theology, but if you're on your own and you just come to Sunday worship and that's the only thing you do, it's not going to work. Right? So if you want to think more about this, there's a book called The Benedict Option, which I can't recommend the whole thing, but it's interesting because it's an Eastern Orthodox guy named Rod Dreher. He said, we've already lost the culture war, so what are Christians supposed to do? And he went back in time to something called St. Benedict's Rule, and basically said there were times when the world was bad enough that the church had to move closer together, and we had to form our own little society. And he's like, this is the idea. I recently heard a lecture, which was fun. It's kind of funny. It was a lecture on African American church history, and he's like, I don't know why he had to go back to St. Benedict when all you got to do is look at the African American church in America for the same reality. We've never, as white Christians, we've never had to kind of see church as our retreat, as our refuge, as our identity. But your black Christian friends have, right? The black Christians in America, that's why the black church has been sustained and been such a strength. In black communities, it's even there it's fading, but the church is still the center of that society. And it's not here. And there's a reason for that, because for hundreds of years, that was the only place they could go and be themselves. Side note, do you know why African American church services are 4 hours long? That's why. Because they go and it's the only place where they can be themselves. It's the only place where they feel truly at home and free. Why would we leave? That's why, anyway. So we have a lot to learn, and it typically isn't going to be, we might need to go back to Eastern Orthodox monks, or we might need to go to African American church history. There's a lot to learn about how a church society comes closer together geographically and spiritually and builds a community that can withstand whatever the world throws at it. Because the world's going to come, and if we're close together, sometimes geographically, but at least spiritually, we're going to be okay. We can take care of each other. We can grow our own food. We can, right? I mean, literally, what if it gets to that? We're going to take care of each other. But if you're out on an island, we're not going to be able to help you. So this speaks to just your commitment to the church. So finally, I want to end here. The last thing you need, the necessity of the church, of front burner faith, of personal faith, you have to have hope. So I said some dark things, and I'll stick by them. But in the end, Jesus is going to win. Right? God has put all things under Jesus' feet, and he's reigning over the whole world until he delivers them back up to the Father. He's glorified by your faith and your faithfulness, especially when it is made more difficult by the world around us. So there's one part of me that's not happy or glad that you guys are going to have it, in a sense, harder than I and my generation did. There's another part of me that looks at church history and sees when the world goes south, the church rises. And the church gets stronger because you're not going to be able to coast in the middle. You're not going to be able to have a limp faith that doesn't mean anything, right? You're going to have to choose to be with Jesus and his people or not. That's the world you're headed into. And I think that's actually okay. I think we're going to all be stronger at the end of it for it. So that's our hope. Jesus is going to win. Yeah, it's going to be harder for you. You're going to be stronger Christians than my generation is because of it. So that's why I'm excited. Okay, that was my mini sermon there at the end. Can I pray for us? Is that good? Okay. Lord, thanks for this time to talk. It's important. There's 1,000 million other pages that we could read and talk about these things, but more than anything, we just need you to give us that personal faith, to keep us tied to the church, and to give us hope. Lord, encourage all these kids, Lord, give them a joy to live for Jesus in a world that's dark, because that's where the light shines the brightest. We pray that you bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen.